Hello, Home Slices. It's Kiera with Home Slice Adulting coming to you with my review for Netflix's The Circle, a social media competition, Season 3, Episode 10, called A Circle Divided. Thanks so much for clicking on this video, and don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of this particular episode. So we start off where we ended off in the previous episode, and Jackie is hosting the Circle of Fortune, where she gets to assign questions to different players, and a question comes up about who do you think is a catfish, and she decides to assign that question to James, and James answers honestly. And what I will say about James this time around, I did not like him at first. I didn't think he was funny. He came off and still kind of comes off as the type of person who talks a lot and wants to be heard, and just sometimes they don't have anything worth hearing, you know. So but what I will say is that he is playing the game better than anybody that I have seen so far, and I think that is true across all of the different seasons. He's made connections with multiple people, including people in both alliances, because he does have a kind of closeness and commonality to Nick. He is the first person to jump in and try to get to know Jackie a little bit better. And for whatever reason, humor is one of those things that's disarming. And that's the problem with people who are very charming, is that if they disarm you with humor, because you have that first kind of positive, funny interaction with them, it prevents you from seeing their negative qualities later on. So if you can disarm people with humor, it's called the halo effect. If you have a good positive first impression of somebody, it's almost, I won't say impossible, but it's so challenging to have to change that first impression to something that is negative. I hope that makes sense. But anyways, James decides to tell his truth, and his truth is that he thinks Isabella is a catfish. And again, James is more perceptive than anybody I've ever seen on this show, and Isabella is a catfish, and now there is a target on her back and a smudge. That's not a smudge on her reputation. So now everybody knows that James thinks that Isabella is a catfish. And interestingly enough, now that I'm thinking about it, nowhere in this particular episode did she ever try to defend herself. She took a different route, and we'll talk about that later. But moving on, according to James, he put 20 on 10 and said that Isabella's coming off too perfect and something is wrong. And again, James is correct. And now Isabella has to face the facts that maybe I'm not playing the game the right way. What could I have done to be a better catfish? So now that has happened, and there's a private chat going on between Daniel and Kay, and they are basically saying James seemed to have a good inroad with Jackie. We need to get him to bring her into the fold, basically. There's also is there another private chat? James does a private chat with Jackie. He gets flirty with the hashtags, hashtag with your fine self. Jackie doesn't eat it up per se. I think Jackie actually responded okay in this situation. James kind of put things out there on the table, telling her about what was going on with him, confirming who he has aligned with, and people who she should trust, and has opened himself up to being her kind of confidant and the person that will introduce her to the circle, since she is a new person. So James, smartly enough, is the first person to really have a private chat with Jackie and move things forward and move her towards their alliance. I'm curious as to why Nick didn't do the same thing. He mentioned multiple times as he was talking to himself that they need to make sure they get to her first. but it doesn't sound like any of them necessarily went after Jackie. James was the first person to actually act on it, and it paid off eventually. So, yeah. So, one thing Jackie said is that she couldn't really get a read on Daniel. And again, Daniel didn't really have anything in common with her, so he didn't speak up when they all introduced themselves. So, anyway, it's the following day. Sophia, who is playing Isabella, is having some regrets, and she knows that she, it has to really, truly, honestly think about how she has played the game and how she's going to recover from being called a catfish. And defending herself was not on that agenda, interestingly enough. So, next up, we have a conversation with James, Daniel, and Kay, and they finally come to a consensus on what all of them have been thinking and kind of talking about at the same time, which is interesting because I feel like that alliance that Kay has had with everybody, there's always one person missing, and then when they bring in that one person is like down, like full flats. So there was a time where Kay and Roxana were aligned and they wanted to bring Daniel in, and then Roxana talked to Daniel, and then Daniel was on board. And so Daniel and Kay had a conversation and wanted to get James to get what's her name, Jackie, on their side. And when they bring James into the chat, come to find out he didn't already did it. They're very much aligned, thinking along the same lines and the same track. So that's what their chat was about. Simultaneously, I wonder how orchestrated that was, that somebody started a chat with their respective alliances all at the same time. Don't play with my intelligence, circle. But anyways, there is a simultaneous chat going on with the other three people, and they all talk about how, hey, we got to go ahead and get Jackie on our side. Jackie is working out. She gets an invitation from Nick, Isabella, and Ashley first, and then she gets one from Daniel, James, and Kay, and it takes her a while to figure it out because she has to reject one in order to accept the other. So, because James has already made a good impression on her and has already private chatted her and has already established some trust with her, she decides to go with that group. And she says she hopes she made the right decision, and I think that she has, because none of the people in that group are catfish. So she did make the right decision, and James absolutely is the MVP for this particular alliance. So more points are being scored for James. Another thing, so once the other alliance with Nick, Ashley, and Isabella realize that they have been rejected, they assume that Kay has gotten to them first. And here's the flaw with the band alliance is what they call themselves, is that they're still so worried about Kay that they don't see that James is really the player to beat. James is flying under the radar. They don't necessarily see him as a contender because he hasn't been around as long. But James is climbing the ranks. And they need to get their focus off of Kay and put it on James, okay? Or he's going to win this whole thing, as annoying as he is. But moving on, they bring Jackie into this chat. And Jackie, they just lay all the cards out on the table. At one point before this, I think, the circle notified them that the circle has been completed, which means there will be no more new players and that the winner is among them. So now that we're at this late stage in the game, it's time to get all the cards out on the table. It's time to bring the new person up to speed and get her onto our side as fast as possible. So basically, James starts putting it all out there, saying, I don't trust Nick. He's a good guy, but he doesn't match, like his words don't match his actions. Isabella's obviously a catfish, and Ashley was just talking to Kay about their friendship, and then threw Kay under the bus at that game. and Daniel co-signed on that, and Kay co-signed on it as well. Additionally, Daniel mentioned something about feeling like a cool kid, like a person who was rejected from the cool kids table. And what I think Daniel meant by that is that none of the people in the band alliance have necessarily reached out to him to really try to connect with him. And that's not 100% true, because Daniel was a part of like the guys chat. So he does have some type of relationship with Nick, but that it has been a while. So for whatever reason, well, I'm pretty sure I know the reason. She's a tall girl. Tall girls are bullied because boys are intimidated by them and all that jazz or whatever. So I think that she identified with the idea of feeling left out or feeling bullied. So she didn't like that the band came across as kind of bullies or whatever. So yeah. So interestingly enough, Jackie also kind of goes ahead straight away and spills the tea that she had to reject the other group's group chat. And she finally hears all the information from this group and she's good to go. Another interesting thing happens. Isabella, for the first time ever, reaches out to Kay. Isabella's sitting in her room and she's saying, I've been so caught up in this game that I have believed and talked about and whatever experience that I have with Kay, and I haven't even talked to her yet. So Isabella hits Kay up to have a conversation. And for me, it's like it's too little too late. And it doesn't seem genuine, and it seems phony, and it seems fake. And now that you have been called out for being a catfish, now you have to try to hook up with who you perceive to be the queen bee. So Isabella's in her room saying these things that, that Kay can't hear. But it's like, is she putting on a show for us, the viewers? Like, you have really been die hard against Kay this whole time. And now that you've been accused of being a catfish, now you want to get some points. And unfortunately, I feel like Kay kind of falls for it. Because later on, Kay ranks Isabella a little bit higher than I would have, personally. But Isabella made a last-ditch effort, and we'll see how it pans out for Isabella. But anyway, I didn't care for that conversation. It felt very fake, very last-ditch effort. Did not like that. But Nick and Jackie have a conversation. It's mildly flirty. And one of the other things that James, Kay, and Daniel mentioned to Jackie is that Nick is obviously really into Isabella, but was flirting with Jackie in front of Isabella when they were all in that group chat. So I was hoping that this would confirm that for Jackie, that he really is being flirty with her, even though he has kind of struck up something with Isabella, which should tell you something about his character, okay? So, anyways, they have a conversation. It goes a little bit better than I thought it would. And the reason why it does is because Jackie gives a very PC type of answer, and I think it's BS. But according to him, he thought it was acceptable. So he's like, why did you reject our chat? And she's like, well, I was offered both chats at the same time, so I had to reject one, and I decided to reject you all because I knew I would have more in common with you or more time to check in with you all later, and I just wanted to get to know the other players better. She didn't hint that James was really the reason why she decided to go with their chat. So she's being strategic and not revealing that she has more so aligned herself with the other alliance. So now Jackie is torn because she's having this conversation with Nick, who I want to say Nick is probably I'm making this up just based off of what I'm feeling or seeing, is that Nick is probably more her speed, but James was there first. So she's conflicted about those two. So next up, there's an alert. They have to rank each other, and Boom, 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 boom. They are ranking each other. And right away, I already know that James is going to be number one. I knew that. But the rest of the rankings, I'm not 100% sure about. So the rating results came in, and number 6, of course, is Isabella. Now that she's been accused of being a catfish, that is in the back of everyone else's head. And also, no, that's about it. Yeah, so she's at the end of the list. Number 5 is Daniel. Is that right? Number 5 is Daniel. And that's saddening because now in the 2 bottom spots, we have one person from each alliance. So next up, we have number 4. Number 4 is Ashley. Yes, number 4 is Ashley. So now 2 of Nick's biggest proponents are in the bottom 3. And third is Kay. So now the top 2 influencers are Nick and James is number 1, as I predicted. So now we are going to come to an impasse, okay? Because now you have one influencer from each camp and they have to get rid of somebody. So here's what I'm thinking. Both of them are going to go very hard for each of their people. Nick has 2 people he wants to protect, and James has 3 people that he wants to protect. Now, when James gets in the little influencer section or whatever, he talks a lot of stuff about how Daniel is just going to do whatever he wants to do. How Nick, is going to just do and block the person that he wants to block. I don't think it'll be that easy. I think that the strategic move is to get rid of Daniel. And here's why. Getting rid of Daniel will make Nick happy, and it will keep the people on alliances even. It's going to be virtually impossible to convince Nick to give up the 2 remaining people in his group. That was the strategic decision. The decision I think that should be made is to get rid of Isabella, but I really don't think that Nick is going to allow that to happen. So we'll see. I'm curious to see how they get past this fork in the road, because it really is going to be, I feel like it would probably be almost impossible to see Ashley or Isabella go if Nick has anything to do with it. So it's going to be quite interesting. I'm excited to see the next episode. So thanks you all for watching. Let me know what you thought about this episode and where you think they're going to be going next. Who is going to be the next person to get blocked, okay? So thanks again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with somebody who you think will enjoy it. Peace out, home slices.